Welcome to CV to Resume Conversion. My name is Kay Gruder. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm Assistant Director of Graduate Student and Postdoc Career Programs and Services at UConn Center for Career Development. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in this webinar. And you should see on your attendee interface, usually in the upper left-hand corner, you'll have the opportunity to submit questions by typing your questions into the chat pane of the control panel. And you may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. Since this is a previously recorded webinar, these questions will be emailed to me and answered within 3 to 5 business days. And then just note that a recording of today's webinar will be emailed typically within 24 hours. And there's also a short evaluation that will appear at the end of the webinar for you to complete. And I really appreciate people taking a time to complete the quick survey because it helps inform me in the kinds of programs that I provide. So in this webinar, we'll define what is a CV and what is a resume, and this is within the context of US employers. And we'll briefly discuss which document to use when applying to positions. Sometimes in a job posting, we'll see that an employer is saying send a resume or a CV. We will talk about common content between the two types of documents, and we will explore adapting content from the CV to the resume. As we begin, I'd like to just take a minute to share a bit about the differences and similarities of a CV and resume. Many times these words are used interchangeably, but within the US context, they are really two different documents, though they share some of the same content. So a CV is a very complete and expansive document, usually including everything you've done and accomplished throughout your academic career. Common sections on a CV include research, teaching, publications, presentations, awards, and work experience, and with many other sections also being added. The CV is a multi-page document, and it is essentially as many pages as it needs to be to include the various areas of content. And a resume, on the other hand, includes content from your background that is most recent and relevant to a specific job posting. So recent and relevant. The resume most often is 1 to 2 pages in length. And I like the image of the blender. It's a pretty good visual, as everything that could go into the blender. So everything here, all the fruits, all the vegetables, everything that could go into the blender could be included on a CV. But for the resume, you would actually pick and choose content that you're putting into the blender, and then it produces this concentrated document, which would be your resume. If you're also interested in learning specifically about writing resumes and writing CVs, the Center for Career Development offers webinars and online resources for both of those documents. This session is not a how to write a CV or how to write a resume, but rather how to convert an existing CV, the content on an existing CV, to a resume. And keep in mind that when applying to a job or opportunity, you will need to provide the document the employer requests. No matter which document is submitted to an employer, the goals are typically similar. For the individual, the goals are often to get your resume read or your CV read, and and to strategically feature your qualifications, your skills, your strengths, your experience and knowledge in relationship to the position or opportunity to which you're applying. Another goal for the individual is to show your fit with the position or opportunity. And then ultimately, you want to obtain an invitation to an interview. And the organization's goals are to compare you to other applicants, to understand your fit and what value you would bring to the position and to the company. The organization's goals are also to narrow the pool of applicants. They're looking to, they have 100 applications. They're looking to get that down to an amount that would be realistic for them to interview, that are a good match for the position. And then ultimately to consider you for an interview. When applying for opportunities using a resume, your document will be typically 1 to 2 pages in length. If you're a doctoral student, it's pretty common to have a 2-page resume, but you still might be taking 4 pages and trying to figure out how could this possibly be 2, or 10 pages of a CV and wonder how could this possibly be 2 pages. Your resume will have relevant and recent content in relationship to the position or opportunity to which you are applying. And at the graduate degree level, which master's or doctoral, the resume will commonly include a qualifications section, which I'll share more about in a bit. And some content will be the same or similar to the content that already exists in your CV. And basically, like I said a little bit earlier, you want to apply with the document the employer identifies in the application process. If the employer is giving you a choice and they say, oh, you can submit a resume or a CV, you could definitely consider sending a CV, the longer document. Really, it's about, sending the best content that features that you can do the work of the position that you're applying to. So let's move on here. And we're going to look at some of the more common content sections included in the CV. So the first content section on a resume will be your contact information. So this is true on a CV as well. The section does not include a section heading. It simply begins with your name, and you can decide how many lines you're going to dedicate to your contact information. So typically people will have their name on its own line, and it will be in bold font and slightly larger than the other content in that contact section. And the rest of your contact information can really be on as few lines as you would like. For a resume, you have some options for how extensive an address you provide. You don't want to use your department's address. So if you have a CV that maybe you've used for academic positions in academia, on that document, it's pretty common to have your department's address, but on a resume, you would not have your department's address. But you might use your residential address or a portion of that address, like here. Let me just bring up this other example. Oh, I don't have it here, but it would be if you had your city and state included in here. Let me just see if it comes up. There we go. So here it's Jonathan Husky, and the individual is just putting their city and state. So it's not necessary to list a residential address. It's pretty common just to have the city and state and not the street address. You want to be strategic. So if you were applying to an employer in Connecticut and you wanted to let the employer know that you live in Connecticut, then having that Vernon CT there would be important. But if you were applying to an opportunity in another state, then this second example here without the city and state can be a better option. By not having a city and state, you're actually signaling to the employer that you are mobile and perhaps willing to take a position outside of Connecticut. The next section in a resume is your qualifications section. This is especially true if you're applying to jobs within industry or organizations. This section is a way to provide a strong overview of what you can bring to a position. And the section is most often written with bullet point statements, and you can see that here in this example. And it includes information about years of experience, skills, and knowledge. And it's also a way to get keywords into your resume, keywords that are showing up in the job posting. You know, you can use this qualification section to also have some of those same keywords appear on your document. So be strategic. And you can see in this example, this person is featuring that they have 6 years of experience in this informing public policy and community development practice through applied research and analysis. You can see that they have specific expertise that they want to feature in this second bullet point statement. They're also identifying some skills, competencies that they're proficient in. They're proficient in monitoring and analyzing policy research and studies affecting the future of economic rights. And they're also featuring in this qualification section that they have some programming knowledge of R and Python. So this is a pretty good example of a qualifications section. And again, you want to have it responsive to the job posting. All right, your education section follows your qualifications, and there's lots of different ways to structure an education section. You know, this is just one example. In this section, you can include all college education, and you can include certifications that are required or essential to your field of study or future work. And sometimes people choose to put certifications in a skills section, and that's another option. So there's a lot of right ways to approach this content. You'll notice that organization in this section is by institution in order of most recent to least recent attended. So that would be, you know, the person would be completing or having completed the PhD and then working backwards to the earlier degrees. And if there's a degree you have not yet completed and you have a sense of when the completion date is, you can definitely put in something like expected and then the month and the year, or anticipated followed by the month and the year. So you would just be writing the word expected May 20 whatever 22, or anticipated May 2022. You can add the title or topic of your dissertation, or if you had a thesis in an earlier degree. It's all about thinking like strategically. You know, if I put my dissertation topic there, is it sharing some information that is valuable in relationship to the position? Sometimes people put the title of the dissertation. Sometimes people say, no, my title's too specific. I'd rather just put what the dissertation focus is or the dissertation topic. So that's, you know, optional content. The same is true with a thesis. And then once you're pursuing a doctorate, it's not common to include GPA at all for any of the institutions you attended. And if you have a couple of fellowships or a couple of academic awards, you can include them in this section under the institution at which you received the award or fellowship. But that's another example where you can have a separate section called awards and fellowships. So, this is going to be similar to a CV, but you'll notice that on a typical academic CV, you might have your advisor or your PI or your dissertation committee listed, but not likely to be including those for a resume. All right, the next section we're going to look at is research experience. And I'm just going to bring up that whole entry. So I have some tips to keep in mind here. Identify the department in which the research is occurring or it occurred, past tense. It's helpful to the reader to see a short statement about the research. So here you can see that that's done by having this little heading in here called research focus. And for a resume, it's not common to include the name of the advisor or the PI unless they are a known entity by the company. So if you are sending in a resume and it was going to a person who knew your faculty member because of maybe an industry collaboration, then you might want to put that faculty member's name in here, but it is not common to do that. And you're going to hear me say this like multiple times, think strategically about that. For a resume, it's recommended that you include select bullet point statements, and those statements feature what you did in your research role. And in creating the bullet point statements, you want to share what you did and or what you accomplished that's relevant to the position for which you're using your resume. So it's not just a list of any of the things that you did, but it's a list of bullet point statements that feature what you've done in relationship to the work that you would be doing. And you'll see that each bullet point statement begins with an action verb. So we have performed, trained, recorded. We can see these right here, performed, trained, and recorded. And those action verbs tell the reader what you did. So you can learn more about bullet point statements in the CV or resume resources and webinars that are provided by the Center for Career Development. So we do go into more detail in some of our other sessions that are designed to feature how to write a CV and how to write a resume. Teaching experience can be included on the resume, but you'll want to consider like what aspects of teaching you want to feature. Are there like skills and accomplishments that you might identify using the bullet point statements where you're thinking, oh, I have some of the aspects of what I did in my teaching role are relevant to the position I'm applying to, or maybe I can show some transferable skills relevant to the job I'm applying for. So in this example, the individual identifies the courses by name, right? Introduction to Political Theory and American Political Parties. And they show the semester taught. And then they used a couple of bullet point statements to show a couple of skills. Not everything they did as an instructor of record, but here they're being selective. They're saying, two things I want to feature is how I can communicate, and the other thing that I want to feature is how I can organize things. So that's what they're choosing to feature in their bullet point statements here for this resume, featuring communication and organizational skills. Another option when teaching is not a part of the job to which you're applying, but you still want to at least show you have been doing it, communicating, training people, instructing. It's to show the course titles of what you taught and just indicating that you taught content on various topics reflected in the course titles. So no course numbers, but just course titles. So again, there are a number of different options for how to feature teaching on a resume. It's again up to you to figure out, you know, what you want to feature based on the position to which you're applying. So it's going to change, all right? We looked at separate content areas just now, right? We looked at a research content area and a teaching content area. And you could decide, depending on the amount of space that you have, keeping in mind that 1 to 2 page goal, you know, how you want to break out your content. But it is also very common to just have a single section called experience or professional experience or work experience, just a very simple title. Here we're using just experience. When using this approach, you will place all of your experience, research, teaching, other work in this one section. All right, and you'd organize it by most recent to least recent. So we can see they have a research assistant position. They chose one of the ways to feature their teaching. And then this was actually a summer position that they had, like a paid summer work position or internship. So all of that content is just being pulled together in one section called experience. So it's another pretty popular option for a resume, and it usually helps decrease the amount of space because you don't have lots of different categories of content. All right, let me move on here. Another section that's common to a resume is a skills section. And I'm just going to bring up the categories here. Basically, you want to create categories in which your skills can fit. And you'll notice that you can include your degree of proficiency in using the various skills as well. So you can use words or phrases like proficient in or familiar with. And this just further provides the employer with a sense of what to expect if they were to hire you. And sometimes the skills section can come up earlier in the resume, like sometimes you might have your contact information, your qualifications, your education, and then maybe your skills, and then your experience. It just depends. If what's sitting in your skills section makes you really competitive or marketable as a job candidate, you might want to make sure that it's appearing higher up in the order of your sections within your resume. So again, options here for where this section might appear. Big question that I often get when I'm working with individuals who are converting content on a CV to a resume is, where do publications and presentations fit on a resume? You know, individuals certainly at the doctoral degree level have spent a lot of time on presentations and publications, and you do want to be sure that they are featured to some degree on a resume. So I'm going to offer a number of different options for that. We know that, from looking at CVs that publications and presentations can take up a lot of space on a CV, but you still want to find a way to include some of that content on the resume. So in this first option, you could have a section called publications, but you would not have lengthy citations. You would not have any citations. The emphasis would be on creating bullet point statements that inform the reader of the resume about some aspect of the publications that you want them to know about. So here the person is saying, I published articles in 10 peer-reviewed journals, including, and then they would proceed to name off the journals here. So the importance here was the focus would be on the actual journals. In this other example, published articles in 10 peer-reviewed journals on topics including, and then they might list out the topics, not the actual titles of the articles, but more broadly the topics on which they published. So this is just, one example of how you might do this. I've seen people actually combine this first approach with part of this second approach. So that's possible too. Here we have something similar for presentations. The person is indicating that they presented at 3 international conferences, including this one, that one, and this other one. So the emphasis is on look at the conferences that I presented at, or presented at 3 international conferences on the following topics. Okay. So it's really a parallel example to the publications. An additional strategy is really to select a few publications and a few presentations and go ahead and use the citations that you're most likely using in your CV. But what you're doing is you're narrowing down the number of publications or the number of presentations that you're featuring. So you could have a section that says recent publications, and then let the reader know 3 out of 5, and then below here where it says use citations, that's where you put in your standard citations for the 3 that you selected. And then similarly for presentations, another option is to use the word relevant. So it's not that these are necessarily recent, but they're relevant in content perhaps to the work that you would be doing or the work of the organization or company. And again, you're letting the reader know, I'm not giving you everything here. I'm giving you 3 out of 9. And I just chose the numeral 3. I mean, it could be 5 out of 9 or 4 out of 9. Sometimes it's, how much space do I have left on that second page? And how much of this can I put? So those are just a few different ways to include publications and presentations and a few ideas about what you might want to feature on the resume. There are lots of different content sections for the resume, and I'm just going to share a few of the more common ones here. So it's pretty common to have a leadership or co-curricular involvement section. Sometimes this is a combined section that's called leadership and co-curricular involvement. And often this is written like your entries in the experience section where you identify your role, what the entity is that you're doing the leadership work within, where that's located, what has been the duration of your involvement, and then you can use bullet point statements to capture a few of the leadership responsibilities that you had or a few of the co-curricular involvements that you engaged in. Service is another popular section. It's often written also like that experience section. And again, it's, your role, the entity that you were doing the service within and where and when. So for these, you can refer back to the experience section and just think about, okay, how do I translate this leadership or co-curricular content that I have into a similar format as what's in that experience section. For these next two, often they are a little more like a list. So if you belong to professional societies, you could have a heading called professional memberships, and you would list the name of the organization and often the duration of your membership. So 2016 to present or whatever it might be. And then as I mentioned earlier, you can have a section called awards or awards and fellowships or awards and grants, whatever combination here makes sense based on what you've received. So these are often displayed in a list and typically most recent to least recent, and then the name of the award or fellowship or grant, the entity that awarded it, and then the dates that the award, grant, or fellowship was received, and then sometimes like why it was awarded, if it was awarded for academic excellence or what have you. So there are a multitude of sections that can be added to a resume, and you'll really want to determine which sections make the most sense to add in order to portray yourself as a strong applicant for the position. When you're thinking about which content to include from your CV on the resume, there are really some questions you can ask yourself. You can ask yourself, which sections from my CV do I want to include on my resume and that are most relevant to the position or opportunity? So it's not just like, what do I want to include, but it's what do I want to include that's most relevant? Another really good question after you select some of the content from your CV is to think about which aspects of this content do I want to feature for this position. Like you might have a huge skills section on your CV, but on this resume for this job opportunity, you might say, I don't need to put all those skills. I'm going to select the most important skills and put them on the resume. All right. Another question is is all the content necessary, or can I choose some and emphasize recent awards, right? Like we talked about with publications and presentations, selected awards. So you can sometimes think of creative ways to show like, I have this content, but I don't have the space, right, to share all of it. So I'm going to find a way to let the reader know this is recent or relevant or selected. And then another question is, which of my content most strongly matches keywords in the job posting? And do I need to revise the content to better match the keywords and phrases in the job posting? And again, in those other webinars and resources on how to write a CV, how to write a resume, we also have a webinar on applicant tracking systems, which are the systems that are matching the resume to the job posting. We have lots of information and resources to support you in some of these other aspects of this process. So this wraps up my content on converting a CV to a resume. Please consider booking an appointment with the Center for Career Development to have your resume reviewed. I know that when I meet with students, I like to see the CV and then see a draft of the resume just to see how well the content is being moved from one document to another. Also know that we're available to help as you explore and pursue your career options and your career planning. And as a final note, you will be emailed a recording of this webinar in the next 24 hours. And there's that really brief survey. I think it's 2 questions, 3 questions that will pop up at the end of the webinar. And lastly, I just wish you all the best as you continue on your career journey.